3 weeks ago, I thought I was just doing my boss a favor by watching his golden retriever. Instead, I stumbled onto something that could destroy everything he's built over the past 15 years. What started as a simple weekend dog-sitting job turned into the most complicated ethical dilemma of my life, and I'm still not sure I made the right choice. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. It was a typical Thursday morning at Henderson and Associates Marketing when Marcus Henderson approached my desk. I'd been working as a junior account coordinator at the firm for about 8 months, and Marcus had always been the kind of boss who remembered your birthday and asked about your weekend plans. He wasn't just the company founder, he was the type of leader who made you feel valued, even when you were just handling client emails and organizing campaign materials. "Emma, I hate to ask this on such short notice," Marcus said, running his hand through his graying hair in that way he did when he was stressed. "But I've got a family emergency in Seattle. My mother-in-law had a fall, and Sarah and I need to fly out tonight. We'll be gone until Monday, maybe Tuesday." I looked up from my computer screen, immediately concerned. "Oh no, is she okay?" "She's stable, but they want to keep her under observation. The thing is, we've got Charlie at home, and our usual pet sitter is out of town." Charlie was Marcus's 3-year-old golden retriever, a gentle giant who occasionally made appearances at the office during Bring Your Pet to Work days. "I know, it's asking a lot, but would you be willing to stay at our house for the weekend? Charlie's pretty low maintenance, and honestly, you'd be doing us a huge favor." The request wasn't entirely unexpected. Marcus knew I lived in a small apartment that didn't allow pets, and he'd mentioned before how much Charlie seemed to like me. Plus, the Henderson house was in Maplewood Heights, one of the nicest neighborhoods in the city. The idea of spending a weekend in a spacious home with a beautiful yard instead of my cramped studio apartment actually sounded appealing. "Of course, Marcus. I'd be happy to help," I replied. "Don't worry about Charlie. He'll be in good hands." The relief on Marcus's face was immediate. "Emma, you're a lifesaver. I'll text you our address and the alarm code." Charlie's routine is pretty simple. He eats twice a day, needs a walk in the morning and evening, and he's got this favorite tennis ball that he'll probably bring you every 5 minutes. That evening, I packed a weekend bag and drove to the Henderson residence. The house was exactly what I'd expected. A beautiful 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn and a wraparound porch. Marcus had left detailed instructions on the kitchen counter, along with emergency contact numbers and Charlie's veterinarian information. The golden retriever greeted me with enthusiastic tail wagging and immediately brought me his treasured tennis ball. Friday passed uneventfully. I worked from the Henderson home office, a spacious room on the first floor with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive oak desk. Marcus had told me I could use his computer if needed, and I'd spent most of the day catching up on client presentations while Charlie napped at my feet. The house felt warm and lived in, with family photos scattered throughout and Sarah's art supplies organized neatly in the sunroom. Saturday morning started the same way. I took Charlie for his morning walk through the neighborhood, admiring the tree-lined streets and well-maintained gardens. When we returned, I settled into the home office to finish some work before the weekend officially began. That's when Charlie decided to create the problem that would change everything. I was reviewing a client proposal when Charlie came bounding into the office, his tennis ball in his mouth as usual. But this time, instead of dropping it at my feet, he seemed determined to play a more elaborate game. He ran behind Marcus's desk, dropped the ball, and then started pawing at something underneath. "What have you got there, buddy?" I asked, getting up to see what had captured his attention. Charlie had managed to knock over a small wastepaper basket, and its contents had spilled across the floor behind the desk. As I bent down to clean up the mess, I noticed something odd. Among the typical office debris, crumpled papers, empty coffee cups, and used tissues, there was a USB drive that had apparently fallen out of the basket. The drive was small and black, with a piece of masking tape wrapped around it. Written on the tape in Marcus's handwriting were the words "Westfield Project Confidential." I picked up the drive, intending to simply place it back in the basket, but something made me hesitate. The Westfield project was Henderson and Associates' biggest client account, worth nearly $2 million annually. It was the campaign that had put our small firm on the map, and Marcus had been personally overseeing it for the past 18 months. But if this was project-related material, why would it be in the trash? Charlie was still pawing around behind the desk, clearly convinced his ball had rolled under there. As I moved to help him, I noticed something else strange. There was a small gap between the desk and the wall, and wedged in that space was a manila folder. The folder was partially hidden, as if it had been hastily shoved there and forgotten. My rational mind told me to leave everything alone. These were Marcus's private business materials, and I was here to watch his dog, not snoop through his office. But something about the whole situation felt off. The USB drive in the trash, the hidden folder, the fact that both items were related to the Westfield project. It was like discovering puzzle pieces that didn't fit the picture. I thought I knew. I spent the next hour trying to focus on my own work, but my eyes kept drifting to the USB drive sitting on the desk where I'd placed it. Charlie had found his ball and was now contentedly chewing on it in the corner, completely unaware of the moral dilemma he'd created for me. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I told myself I was just being thorough. If there was something important in the trash, maybe Marcus would want to know about it. And if the folder contained confidential client information, perhaps it shouldn't be wedged behind his desk where it could be damaged or lost. I retrieved the manila folder first. It was thicker than I'd expected, stuffed with what appeared to be financial documents, email printouts, and handwritten notes. The tab was labeled, Westfield, internal use only, in Marcus's careful script. As I flipped through the contents, my confusion deepened. The documents appeared to be billing records, but the numbers didn't make sense. According to the papers I was seeing, Henderson and Associates had been billing Westfield Industries for services and expenses that seemed inflated, significantly inflated. There were charges for consultation fees that were 3 times our normal rate, expenses for research materials that I knew we'd never purchased, and billable hours that exceeded what our entire team had actually worked on the project. But what really made my stomach drop were the email printouts. They were correspondence between Marcus and Daniel Westfield, the company's CEO, but they weren't about marketing campaigns or advertising strategies. They were about something called Project Clearwater, and the tone was completely different from the professional communications I was used to seeing. In one email, Marcus had written, "Daniel, the latest numbers look good on our end. The shell company invoices are processing smoothly, and we've maintained the paper trail through the Henderson subsidiary. Your board will never trace the redirected funds back to the original source." Daniel's response was equally troubling.
Excellent work, Marcus. The quarterly reports show exactly what we need them to show.
Keep the marketing invoices coming. They provide perfect cover for the additional transfers. I sat back in Marcus's chair, the folder trembling in my hands. This wasn't just billing irregularities or accounting errors. This looked like deliberate fraud, possibly embezzlement. Marcus and Daniel Westfield appeared to be using their legitimate business relationship as a cover for moving money through fake invoices and shell companies. My mind raced through the implications. If this was real, it meant Marcus had been stealing from his biggest client while simultaneously helping that client steal from someone else, possibly their own company or investors. The marketing contract that had made Henderson and Associates successful was apparently just a front for a much larger financial scheme. I picked up the USB drive with shaking hands and plugged it into Marcus's computer. The drive contained dozens of files, spreadsheets, financial projections, bank records, and more email correspondence. As I opened file after file, the scope of what I was seeing became clear. Marcus and Daniel had been running this operation for over a year. They'd created a complex web of fake companies, fraudulent invoices, and redirected payments that had moved nearly $4 million through various accounts. The legitimate marketing work that Henderson and Associates performed for Westfield Industries was real, but it was being used to justify massive overpayments that were then funneled through shell companies and split between Marcus and Daniel. The worst part was how sophisticated the scheme was. They'd created fake vendor contracts, fabricated expense reports, and even set up bogus research projects to justify the inflated billing. Anyone doing a casual audit would see legitimate marketing expenses and assume everything was normal. It was only when you looked at the actual numbers versus the work performed that the fraud became apparent. I spent the next 2 hours going through the files, hoping I'd misunderstood something or that there was an innocent explanation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements showed deposits that matched the fraudulent invoices. Email chains detailed how to structure the payments to avoid detection. There were even notes about which employees to keep in the dark about the special billing arrangements. As I read through Marcus's handwritten notes, I realized I'd been completely naive about the man I'd been working for. The thoughtful boss who remembered birthdays and asked about weekend plans was the same person who'd written, "Need to increase Q4 billing by 30% to meet our targets. Suggest adding consultation fees for strategic planning sessions that never happened." Daniel agrees. This approach maintains plausible deniability. Charlie wandered over and rested his head on my lap, sensing my distress. I absently petted his golden fur while my mind struggled to process what I'd discovered. This wasn't just about Marcus and Daniel. This level of financial fraud could destroy both companies, ruin careers, and potentially send people to prison. The immediate question was what to do next. I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen the documents, but I also couldn't ignore the fact that I'd essentially been snooping through my boss's private files. The ethical implications were staggering. Should I confront Marcus when he returned? Should I report this to authorities? Should I try to contact someone at Westfield Industries to warn them? As Saturday evening approached, I carefully returned the folder to its hiding spot behind the desk and put the USB drive back in the waste paper basket. I needed time to think, to figure out the right course of action. But I also knew that whatever I decided to do would fundamentally change everything about my job, my relationship with Marcus, and possibly my entire career. That night, I lay awake in the Henderson guest room, staring at the ceiling while Charlie slept peacefully at the foot of the bed. The house that had seemed so welcoming just 24 hours earlier now felt like a facade hiding something dark and corrupt. Every family photo on the walls, every carefully arranged bookshelf, every sign of the comfortable life Marcus and Sarah had built, it all felt tainted by what I'd discovered. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The most disturbing part wasn't just the financial fraud itself, but the realization that I'd been working for someone who could maintain such a convincing facade of integrity while orchestrating something this elaborate and dishonest. How many other employees at Henderson and Associates had no idea what was really funding their paychecks? How many clients trusted Marcus with their marketing budgets while he was simultaneously defrauding his biggest account? Sunday morning brought no clarity, only more questions. As I took Charlie for his morning walk, I found myself looking at the neighborhood differently. These beautiful houses, these well-maintained lawns, these symbols of success, how much of it was built on the same kind of deception I'd uncovered in Marcus's office? I knew that Marcus and Sarah would be returning Monday evening, which meant I had less than 2 days to decide what to do with the information I'd accidentally discovered. The weight of that decision felt overwhelming, especially since I was completely alone with it. This wasn't the kind of problem I could discuss with friends or family without potentially making them complicit in whatever choice I made. The weekend that was supposed to be a simple favor for my boss had become the most consequential few days of my life. And as I watched Charlie chase squirrels in the backyard, blissfully unaware of the human complications surrounding him, I couldn't help but wonder if ignorance really was bliss. Whatever I decided to do next would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Marcus and Daniel, but for everyone connected to both companies. The question was whether I had the courage to do what was right, even if it meant destroying the career of the man who'd given me my first real job opportunity. The clock was ticking, and Charlie's innocent game of fetch had set in motion events that would soon force me to choose between loyalty and justice, between keeping quiet and speaking up, between protecting my own interests and doing what I believed was right. As Sunday afternoon faded into evening, I realized that the real test wasn't what I'd discovered in Marcus's office, it was what I was going to do about it. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, overcast sky that seemed to mirror my internal turmoil. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night cycling through different scenarios and their potential consequences. Charlie seemed to sense my anxiety, staying closer than usual as I went through his morning routine one last time. Marcus had texted around 7 a.m. to let me know their flight would land at 6 p.m., and they'd be home by 8. That gave me roughly 11 hours to make a decision that would affect multiple lives and careers. The weight of that responsibility felt crushing. I decided to spend the morning gathering more evidence, not because I needed confirmation of what I'd found, but because I needed to understand the full scope of the fraud. If I was going to act on this information, I owed it to everyone involved to be thorough. Back in the home office, I carefully retrieved the hidden folder and USB drive. This time, I approached the documents with a more systematic mindset, taking notes and creating a timeline of events. What I discovered was even more disturbing than I'd initially realized. The fraud had started small, almost 18 months ago, with Marcus billing Westfield Industries for legitimate marketing services at slightly inflated rates. The early emails showed Daniel Westfield questioning some of the charges, but Marcus had convinced him it was standard industry practice. From there, the scheme had gradually escalated. By month 6, they'd moved beyond simple billing inflation to creating entirely fictional services. Marcus would invoice for market research consultations that never happened, focus group analyses that were never conducted, and strategic planning retreats that existed only on paper. Daniel, who had initially seemed reluctant, had become an enthusiastic participant once he realized how much money they could generate. The most chilling discovery was a series of emails from just 3 months ago, where Marcus and Daniel discussed expanding their operation. They'd identified 2 other companies in Daniel's network that could potentially be brought into the scheme. Marcus had written, "The beauty of our arrangement is its scalability. Every legitimate business relationship can become a cover for additional revenue streams." I found detailed financial projections showing how they plan to increase their fraudulent billing by 50% over the next year. They'd even discussed hiring additional staff at Henderson & Associates to create more believable cover for their inflated invoices. The thought that Marcus might have been planning to use me and my colleagues as unwitting accessories to his crimes made me physically ill. But the evidence that ultimately convinced me to act was a folder labeled Insurance Policies. Inside were documents showing that Marcus had been secretly recording some of his conversations with Daniel, maintaining what appeared to be an insurance policy against potential exposure. If Marcus was willing to betray his co-conspirator, what did that say about his character and his willingness to sacrifice others to protect himself? By noon, I'd made my decision. I couldn't remain silent about what I'd discovered. The fraud was too extensive, too calculated, and too likely to continue growing. More importantly, I'd realized that staying quiet would make me complicit in future crimes. Every fraudulent invoice Marcus submitted from this point forward would be something I could have prevented. The question was how to proceed. I considered several options: confronting Marcus directly, reporting the fraud to law enforcement, or contacting someone at Westfield Industries. Each approach had significant risks and potential consequences. Confronting Marcus seemed like the most direct approach, but it would also give him the opportunity to destroy evidence or manipulate the situation. He'd already proven himself capable of elaborate deception, and I had no reason to believe he wouldn't try to discredit me or find ways to shift blame. Reporting directly to law enforcement felt like the most responsible choice, but I was concerned about the complexity of the financial crimes and whether I had enough evidence to make a compelling case. I also worried about the potential legal implications of how I'd obtained the information. After considerable deliberation, I decided to contact Jennifer Walsh, the chief financial officer at Westfield Industries. I'd found her contact information in Marcus's files, and she appeared to be someone with the authority to investigate the fraud while also having a vested interest in protecting her company from further losses. I spent the afternoon crafting a careful email to Jennifer, explaining how I'd discovered the documents and providing a detailed summary of the fraudulent scheme. I attached copies of the most damning evidence, including the email exchanges between Marcus and Daniel, the fraudulent invoices, and the financial records showing the money trail. The email was one of the most difficult things I'd ever written. I had to be precise about the facts while also explaining the circumstances that led to my discovery. I made it clear that I'd stumbled upon the evidence accidentally and that I was coming forward because I believed it was the right thing to do. At 3:47 p.m., I hit send. The moment the email disappeared from my outbox, I felt a mixture of relief and terror. There was no taking it back now. Whatever happened next was out of my control. Jennifer's response came faster than I'd expected. At 4:23 p.m., she called me directly. Her voice was professional, but clearly shaken as she asked for additional details about the documents I'd found. She explained that Westfield Industries had been conducting an internal review of their vendor relationships and had already identified some irregularities in their payments to Henderson and Associates. "Emma, what you've sent me confirms our worst suspicions," Jennifer said. "We've been quietly investigating unusual billing patterns for the past month, but we didn't have direct evidence of fraud until now. Daniel Westfield has been under internal investigation for several weeks." The conversation lasted nearly an hour. Jennifer explained that Daniel had been engaging in similar fraudulent schemes with other vendors, and the company's board of directors had been building a case against him. My evidence provided the missing pieces they needed to understand the full scope of his activities. "We'll need you to provide a formal statement to our legal team," Jennifer continued. "And I have to warn you that this will likely result in criminal charges against both Daniel and Marcus. Are you prepared for that level of involvement?" I took a deep breath before answering. "I understand the consequences. I just couldn't stay silent about what I'd discovered." Jennifer assured me that Westfield Industries would provide legal protection and support throughout the investigation. She also mentioned that there would likely be a significant reward for whistleblowers in cases involving this level of financial fraud, though she emphasized that the company's primary concern was preventing further losses and holding the perpetrators accountable. After ending the call, I sat in Marcus's office, surrounded by the evidence of his crimes, and tried to process what I'd set in motion. Within hours, law enforcement would be involved, assets would be frozen, and careers would be destroyed. The comfortable life that Marcus and Sarah had built, the success of Henderson and Associates, the trust of clients and employees, all of it would come crashing down. I thought about my colleagues at the company, most of whom had no idea what Marcus had been doing. They'd arrive at work tomorrow expecting a normal day, only to find their workplace transformed into a crime scene. Some of them would lose their jobs when the company inevitably collapsed. Others would face scrutiny and questioning, as investigators tried to determine who knew what and when. The hardest part was knowing that I'd played a role in destroying the life of someone who'd been kind to me. Marcus had given me my first real job opportunity, had been supportive and encouraging, and had trusted me with his home and his beloved dog. The fact that his kindness had been built on a foundation of criminal behavior didn't make the betrayal feel any less personal. At 6:15 p.m., I received a text from Marcus. "Flight landed early. We'll be home in about an hour. Thanks again for everything. Emma, you're a lifesaver." I stared at the message, knowing it would be one of the last normal communications I'd ever receive from him. By tomorrow, he'd know that I was responsible for exposing his crimes. The gratitude and warmth in his text would be replaced by anger, betrayal, and probably hatred. I spent the remaining time cleaning the house and preparing Charlie for his owner's return. The golden retriever seemed excited about the prospect of seeing Marcus and Sarah again, his tail wagging as he heard their car pull into the driveway. He had no idea that his simple game of fetch had triggered a chain of events that would fundamentally alter everyone's lives. Marcus and Sarah walked through the front door looking tired but relieved. Sarah's mother had recovered better than expected, and they were both grateful to be home. Marcus immediately went to Charlie, who greeted him with his usual enthusiasm, completely unaware of the role he'd played in exposing his owner's crimes. "Emma, I can't thank you enough," Marcus said, giving me a warm hug. "Everything looks perfect. Charlie seems happy and relaxed. You really went above and beyond." I managed to smile and accepted their thanks, even though every word felt like a knife in my chest. These would be among the last kind words Marcus would ever speak to me. By tomorrow morning, everything would change. As I gathered my things to leave, Sarah insisted on packing some leftover food for me, and Marcus pressed an envelope into my hands. "A little something extra for going above and beyond," he said with a genuine smile. "You really saved us this weekend." The envelope contained $500 cash, and a handwritten note thanking me for my reliability and trustworthiness. The irony was overwhelming. Marcus was paying me for qualities that had led me to expose his criminal activities. I drove home that night, knowing I'd done the right thing, but feeling no satisfaction or pride in my decision. The next morning would bring investigators, arrests, and the complete destruction of everything Marcus had built. The employees at Henderson and Associates would face an uncertain future, and I'd be responsible for all of it. The call came at 7:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. Jennifer Walsh informed me that both Marcus and Daniel had been arrested at their homes and were being held pending formal charges. The FBI had executed search warrants at both Henderson and Associates and Westfield Industries, seizing computers, files, and financial records. "The evidence you provided was instrumental in securing the warrants," Jennifer explained. "Without your courage to come forward, this fraud could have continued for years and cost millions more." Over the following weeks, the case became a local news story. Marcus and Daniel were charged with multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. The total amount of stolen money was estimated at over $6 million, significantly more than I'd initially calculated. Henderson and Associates was forced to close permanently, leaving 15 employees without jobs. Several clients sued the company for breach of contract, and Marcus's personal assets were seized to pay restitution. Sarah, who had been completely unaware of her husband's crimes, was forced to sell their beautiful home and move in with her parents. The hardest part was facing my former colleagues. Some understood my decision and supported my choice to expose the fraud. Others felt betrayed, believing I should have found a way to handle the situation without destroying everyone's livelihood. The guilt over their lost jobs was almost unbearable, even though I knew I'd had no choice but to act. Marcus was ultimately sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. Daniel received a slightly longer sentence due to his leadership role in the scheme. Both men were ordered to pay full restitution, though investigators estimated it would take decades to recover even a fraction of the stolen money. The FBI investigation revealed that my discovery had prevented an even larger fraud. Evidence found during the raids showed that Marcus and Daniel had been planning to expand their operation to include government contracts, which could have resulted in tens of millions in additional losses. Jennifer Walsh kept her promise about legal protection and support throughout the investigation. Westfield Industries also provided a substantial whistleblower reward, which helped me financially during the months of legal proceedings and testimony. 6 months after that weekend with Charlie, I found a new job at a marketing firm in another city. The case had made me somewhat notorious in the local business community, and I needed a fresh start. My new employers were aware of my history and actually considered my integrity an asset. I never saw Marcus again after that night. He returned from Seattle. I heard through mutual contacts that he blamed me entirely for his downfall, claiming I'd violated his trust by snooping through his private files. He apparently never acknowledged that his own criminal behavior was the real cause of his problems. The experience taught me that doing the right thing isn't always rewarded or appreciated. Sometimes integrity requires making choices that hurt people you care about, destroy relationships, and create consequences you never intended. But it also taught me that remaining silent in the face of wrongdoing makes you complicit in the harm that follows. Charlie, I learned, had been rehomed with Sarah's sister in Portland. He was reportedly doing well, and had no idea of the role he'd played in one of the largest corporate fraud cases in the city's history. Sometimes I wonder if he still plays fetch with that same enthusiasm, still brings tennis balls to anyone who'll throw them, and still trusts that the world is fundamentally good. In the end, a simple weekend favor had become the defining moment of my career and my understanding of moral responsibility. The decision to speak up had cost me a job, strained friendships, and created enemies, but it had also prevented millions of dollars in additional fraud and held two criminals accountable for their actions. Looking back, I know I made the right choice. But I also know that right choices aren't always easy ones, and sometimes the cost of doing what's ethical is higher than anyone should have to pay. The weight of that weekend, of that decision, of those consequences, it's something I carry with me every day. And sometimes, when I see a golden retriever playing fetch in a park, I'm reminded that the most innocent actions can have the most profound consequences, and that sometimes a simple game of fetch can change everything. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.